Good evening, everyone. Uh, so, uh, so, Today we are going to talk about the topic called develop and deploy Next.js component in Sitecore. And myself, Prabhu Ranganathan. Okay. Vignesh, can you go to the next slide? So, Vignesh, can you go to the next slide? Okay. So, myself, Prabhu Ranganathan. So, I'm working as a Sitecore architect. I have more than 12 plus years of experience in the IT industry and more than 8 plus years of experience in Sitecore. So I have Sitecore certificate and Arclos certified. Already Vinod had mentioned about our profile, right? So you can reach me at through the LinkedIn handle called Prabhu-Ranganathan. And for my blogs, you can visit the Medium website at prabhu.ranganathan. And for and in the other hand, Vignesh Jothikumar, he's working as a Sitecore specialist, and his LinkedIn profile is Vignesh-Jothikumar. And for his blogs, you can go to the Medium website and at witness.jyotikumar.
Yeah,
And so today's topic is it's about develop and deploy Next.js application in Sitecore. It's one of the, in the in current and from current approach, so it's completely changed, right? So in the recent web development world, it's completely recently changed into the headless mode. So we all know that all the applications and whatever the websites that we are creating, we are going with headless. And Sitecore is also providing those kind of features in inbuilt. So that one kind of a part is called Next.js integration with headless. So that's the topic we are going to discuss about it today. And the agenda for today is it's about we'll go through some basics about what is headless and why headless, and what are the headless integration modes which is available, and some basic concepts of JSS and Next.js. When we start working on Next.js application, so what are the application overview that we can take a look at that in a nutshell, and some usage of placeholders and how it is takes place, and what how it's doing the major role in the implementation of headless implementation, and the component overview. We'll take one component and we'll see how we can structurize that, and so that kind of overview you can see that, and what are the deployment options are available inside code when we are doing a Next.js application implementation. And in the demo section, we'll see about how we are creating a basic Next.js component and deploying that into our local sandbox, so local Sitecore sandbox, and how we are rendering it over there. So it's a small demo. Maybe it's a kind of a basic thing, but somehow some of them may not know about how we are doing a basic development in Next.js, and how we need to deploy that in local sandbox. So we'll talk about we'll see some demo on that in the agenda. That's all about the agenda. So the first thing is, what is headless? So what is headless CMS? So headless CMS, in the sense, so I mean in the conventional approach, so the earlier stages and all, when we are going with the CMS part, so we have all the contents, and we are taking all the contents and display rendering over the website. It's called dynamic contents. Managing that content, everything is possible. And when coming into the headless part, so right now the accessibility is, I mean, it's grown in a horizontal manner, right? So people are using multiple channels, and they would like to see their contents on the channels they are utilizing it. For example, I'm accessing from a laptop, and someone is accessing from mobile. Sometimes you would like to access it from any AR VR devices or IoT devices. In that case, um, making that a centralized data is very important, right? So, for example, I have a website information and I need to access the same content across all the devices. I mean, any applications I'm creating. For example, there is an Amazon website, so it has the same content when we are accessing the mobile devices or any other devices you have. So in that kind of a scenario, so we would like to go with the content management. Content is centralized, and that content can be shared across in the multiple channels, right? So that is two. That is called headless CMS. So I don't just I need to take the content from the centralized place, and I can render it as my own. So that's how it works in headless CMS. So how it is happening in the backend it's actually happening through APIs. So for example, coming to Sitecore part, so we have the content and Sitecore is exposing all the content through API, and another channels are getting that, acquiring that through API. So how it is possible? It is actually when we are coming into the headless CMS world, the layers are separated. So in earlier stages, content layer and presentation layer are coupled. I mean, it depends on one another. But in our headless CMS scenario, we are actually separating both. It's a decoupled mode. Content is separate and presentation is separate. So any channel would like to acquire the content. They're actually the content layer is exposed through APIs, and the content will be um, fed into the respective channels. So the presentation layer may encompass the variety of channels, right? So as I mentioned earlier, it may be a website or mobile application or IoT device or AR VR device on any even the smart bands or smartwatches. These are all about the basic introduction about the headless. And okay, so we know about headless and why headless. So I'm creating an application and why headless is important. Vignesh, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So, why headless? In the sense, as I mentioned earlier, content should be distributed, right? So, if it is centralized content, it can be distributed to multiple channels. That is possible. That we used to call it as omni-channel content delivery. So, its content is centralized, and we can share it across all the channels. That is in some kind of a scenario, right? Some kind of a scenario, if you have a requirement to make it something, the content is centralized and you have that content has to be distributed across multiple channels. In that kind of a area, you should go with headless CMS is the best option. And it has a flexibility, right? So since the front end is and the back end is decoupled, I mean, the presentation layer is different and content layer is different, right? Both are decoupled. Um, so you can take the content and you can style the content in your way, and you can present it on your own. You can just taking the content. For example, for a mobile application, when you're accessing the website, the style may be different, and when you're accessing in the mobile, most of them would like to go with the dark theme. You can style on that manner and presenting the content, right? So it has that kind of a flexibility, and content update is much more faster, since there is no dependency on front-end templates. In some kind of a scenario, we always we made some dependencies on front-end templates. We keep that in our mind when we are creating a content. We have that in our mind, and creating the template based on that, right? So that can be avoided. So because of that, the content update is much faster, and collaboration is very much easy here, because developers can only focus on building the front end, while content authors can create the content independently without any dependencies. And it has scalability. That's another key feature. It can be um, scaled, since it has no dependency, right? That is a main concept. We would like to go with headless CMS. Any headless development, if you would like to go with, you have to keep that in your mind. So what are the it's completely based on the requirement, right? So you have to keep that in your mind. So when we are going into the headless CMS, you have to analyze why we are going with the headless CMS. So all these requirements are necessary in your implementation. Obviously, you can go with the headless CMS as the best option. And next slide. So coming into the Sitecore part, so how Sitecore Headless works. So we know about headless CMS right now. It is completely decoupled layers, and we see why headless is important and when we have to choose the headless CMS and all. And coming to the Sitecore world, Sitecore is also providing, as I mentioned earlier, Sitecore is also providing headless features. So um, how Sitecore Headless works as per the implementation wise. So we all know that we most of them worked on Sitecore XM or XP implementation is a conventional approach of any kind of a Sitecore XP implementation, right? It has CM server and CD server, and CD server's actual one is presenting the content. So that's how it worked, right? So when coming into the Sitecore headless part, Sitecore is offers headless services. So it is actually I mean, so we have a rendering host. That rendering host can be created through um, applications. I mean, any kind of applications you can create it, and that rendering host applications um, can connect with the headless services. That headless services actually getting the content from the respective Sitecore instance and providing the content. So Sitecore headless services, there are many kind of services which is available in Sitecore through rendering engines or GraphQL or layout service. There are many things is there. But coming to the rendering engine part, you have two different SDKs are available in order to create the applications or rendering host applications. One is ASP.NET Rendering SDK, and another one is Sitecore JavaScript Rendering SDK. So .NET Core Rendering SDK, I think you all know that we can create the application through .NET Core, and JavaScript Rendering SDK, it would be a front-end framework. Any JavaScript front-end frameworks you can use along with the JSS, like Next.js, React, Vue, or Angular. And coming to the rendering engine part, there are two kinds of rendering engines are available in Sitecore. One is Node.js rendering engine, and another one is HTTP rendering engine. Node.js rendering engine is a kind of a old one. When the headless got introduced, Node.js rendering engine was the one who introduced it by Sitecore. And HTTP rendering engine is pretty latest one, which is available from Sitecore 9.1.1 and later. So in case if you are building in your application with Next.js, so any application that is built using JSS for Next.js, this HTTP rendering engine is by default. You don't need to do any additional configurations. You can go ahead and get started with that. And in case if you're going with the ASP.NET Rendering SDK and creating an application based on that, you have to do some basic configurations to achieve this rendering engine. And Node.js rendering engine is, on the other hand, everything is through Node server. So that is already available when JSS got introduced. And next slide is Vignesh, can go to next slide.
Actually, I'm in a next slide.
Okay. So the headless integration nodes. So in the headless world, there are some common integration nodes which are available. One is decoupled. So in the decoupled on headless is front end and back end are completely separated. So the actually the front end is fetching the content from the back end through APIs and displays it using its own logic and templates. You can completely create all your front end templates, and based on the front end templates, you can fetch the content in the back end and you can render it. And fully headless is completely similar to decoupled, but only thing is it does not rely on any presentation logic in the backend. So in case if you are using the decoupled architecture, it's actually providing the presentation as well. You can configure to take the presentation as well from the backend, and you can just use that and apply your own style for the presentation. But fully headless is only getting the content, not the presentation logic. You are not getting the presentation logic. You are just taking the only the concrete content through APIs, and the presentation is you are creating on your own. Hybrid is in some scenario you have the traditional CMS, and some pages are should be in the traditional approach, and some pages or sections can be utilized as the headless architecture, right? So in that kind of a scenario, you can go with the hybrid. And the next thing is static site generation and server side rendering is static site generation is it generates actually it generates HTML at the build time itself. So when you are creating all the components and templates, and when we are building it, the HTML pages are got ready and which can be served when user is accessing the pages. So since the front end is already pre-rendered, the performance is very good when we are going with the SSG, because it's when the build time itself the HTML got generated, right? So the loading time is very fast, and it has improved SEO. It is also taking the content from the backend through APIs, and during the build process itself, and creating the HTML. But the only con here is, I mean, only disadvantage in using the SSG is um, you cannot see the real-time updates. For example, in case you are having any changes in your backend content and you are publishing it, that content you cannot see it real time. So that may take its own time to render the updated content. When on the other hand, it is called server-side rendering (SSR). So SSR it's actually taking the content from the server, but the request is going through front end. So it has a lot of so the routing is handled by itself, right? So because of that, it has improved SEO, and it is also taking the content fetched from the APIs in the backend, but it is taking during the runtime. So when the client is requesting the application, while that time it is actually taking the content and generating the HTML during the runtime. The another is Jamstack. It is actually um, it is also the kind of architecture right now. It's one of the widely used architecture the recent times. So it has same concept, JavaScript, APIs, and markup. It is actually using the pre-built markups and same kind of API-driven development. It's also fetching the backend content through APIs, and sometimes it actually using the SSG and SSR for the better performance. And so the next part is we're coming into the some basics of Next.js and Next.js and JSS. So coming to JSS, we all know that. So when headless uh, CMS is introduced in Sitecore, the first uh, JavaScript framework, one of the framework we all came to know is JSS. It provided by Sitecore. So it actually helps developers to create the front-end applications. So it has a list of libraries, and which helps us to create the psycho renderings and components, and it has a set of framework which has its own, and any JavaScript libraries you can use. For example, React or Angular or Next.js, you can use it, and with the help of JSS, you can start creating the site-code components and templates. So there is a key usage of having JSS in your creating any JavaScript runtime applications. So now when creating with JSS, the content is dynamic, right? So because it is actually very interactive and dynamic content, because it is not providing the static content, it actually helps us to take the content from Sitecore backend and rendering in the front end part. So any user interaction, right? So we are not creating any static content through JSS. It actually helps to take the dynamic content, which the content is already stored inside code. So we are taking that dynamically and rendering it. So while coming to the Next.js, it's actually a kind of a framework. It's using the React library to create web pages. So it completely sitting on top of React.js, and it on top of that it has some pre-built functionalities like routing and server-side rendering, SSG. It has its own built-in functionalities. So if we all know about someone who's know well about React.js, I think they can go ahead and create Next.js applications as soon as possible. I mean, it's not a big deal for them to create a Next.js application because it's completely using the React library. So when coming into the Sitecore world, so I want to create a Next.js application. It's a headless application, but I'm going to use the Next.js. And so what are the ways to create the Next.js application? That is the next question we keep our mind, right? So there are two ways we can create the application, Next.js application for Sitecore. One is code first workflow and another one is Sitecore first workflow. So what is code first workflow? The code first workflow. I'm a front end. Assume I am a front end developer. I don't want to rely on the Sitecore instance, right? So I don't know Sitecore first. I don't know Sitecore. I'm a front end developer. I know React and Next.js. I want to create an application. So in that manner, what you can do is you can go with the code first workflow. You can start creating components. So through Next.js, you can create all the components with the mock contents. Instead of taking the contents from Sitecore, you can have your mock contents within the application itself. Based on that, you can start creating the application. So in that kind of scenario, you don't need any Sitecore instance installed in your machine. Assume it's a complete front-end developer who is creating the Next.js application. And another approach is Sitecore first workflow. It's completely assume we have a Sitecore instance in our machine, and then we are creating all the components and templates and over there, and based on that we are creating an application in Next.js. That's how it works. That is called Sitecore first workflow. So whatever it is, so what is the way to create the application? For example, in a conventional manner, what we usually do is we are going to the Visual Studio and creating it would be a tedious projects or non Helix principle based projects. So we have the habitat prototypes, or we have some design patterns which are available. Based on that, we used to create our applications, right? So in the same scaffolding, which is also available in Next.js creation as well. So the basic requirement to create the application is you have to install the JSS. Before that, you make sure you have the node installed in your machine, and then you have to install JSS. And in order to create the Next.js application, you have the basic command to create it. JSS create your Next.js application and Next.js. In the VS Code, you can run this command, will create this set of scaffolding folders in your Next.js application, and then you can go ahead and start creating your applications over there. It actually works in two different modes. One is disconnected mode and another one is connected mode. Disconnected mode, in case if you are going with a code first workflow, I would say we can go with the disconnected mode, since there is no Sitecore instance installed in your machine, so there is no dependency on Sitecore, right? So in that scenario, you can go ahead and start using the disconnected mode. uh, for the just simply running the command JSS start will give you the disconnected mode. So all the contents are mockup contents, and based on mockup contents, you can go ahead and start creating your components in Next.js. When coming into the connected mode, you need a Sitecore instance in your machine. So you that is getting connected. It's actually connected with your Sitecore instance, and you are based on the Sitecore instance, you are creating the application, Next.js application. So in that scenario, when you want to connect your Sitecore instance with your Next.js application, you need to make sure that you have installed the Sitecore JavaScript services. It's a kind of headless services which is installed in your Sitecore instance, and you have to create the Sitecore API key, and after that you have to run the few commands, so JSS setup, and then you have to run the JSS deploy config, and you have to build the JSS. So in that way, it get connected to the Sitecore instances. And in on the right section, what you're saying is it's a kind of a folder structure. It's a kind. I mean, it can be the folder structure can be based on your own. You can change it, but the best way to do is the best way to organize is, I would say, you can even go with this approach. So we have a source folder. Inside the source folder, SRC folder, you have the app folder. So inside the app, you can separate much more for components and utilities and hooks and types and GraphQL. All are separate folders. Inside that, you can create your components and utilities and hooks or GraphQL contents, whatever the logics you're creating it, you can create inside that. And for the pages, it has a separate folders and styles, stories in case of you have any storybooks implementation, you can even have the stories as a kind of a folder, and assets as any static images or fonts you are using in your Next.js application. You can yeah, you can make it reside inside the asset folder. So basic skeleton, it's not a recommended one, but it's a good folder structure. In case if you want to follow it, you can go ahead and follow this concept. Next slide is about the placeholder. Um, what as I mentioned earlier, placeholder is also playing a major role when we are implementing the headless part. The placeholder is almost same that we currently using in the Sitecore placeholder, right? So what are the Sitecore placeholder concept we are utilizing? That is the same concept in JSS as well. JS also the same placeholder concept can be utilized, but only major difference is not major difference. Only additional thing you have to do is when you are creating a placeholders in JSS, you have to mention that in your layout services. So what are the placeholder you are creating it, and inside that any components and any the components you are going to place it. If that needs to be available in your API layout services, you have to mention that corresponding placeholder in your layout services item. Otherwise, that specific layout service contents will not be exist in the API that you are requesting. Vignesh, next slide. Yeah. So it's about the sample component overview when we are creating a Next.js application. For example, here I am taking the header component. So for the header component, so we have the component folder called header. Inside that, you can have header.tsx, it's a TypeScript extension. That there you have all the component logic, and header.css have all the styles information, and assets folders have any static assets you are using. And more than that, you have all the logic. So, what is there any mapping to Sitecore in the sense taking the content from Sitecore and mapping that into your properties? Those you have all the logics you have to mention it here. The sample code I have mentioned here is it's about the page, article page. What it will do is actually um, getting the routing information and then querying the information, querying the data from Sitecore content tree slash Sitecore slash content slash article. That what we are seeing is it's actually taking the content from the Sitecore through GraphQL, and then it is loading that field information into the property, title, author, contents or props, taking from assigning that and sending that information into the article component. So the article component is the one we are actually importing it. So it's actually when we are returning that information to article component, you have make sure you have designed that component article.tsx. You have to be designed that component all the rendering data. So how it has to be rendered, those logics you have to implement it in that component. This is how the component overview. And when coming into the deployment options, so I create the Next.js application in Sitecore. And what are the ways to deploying that in what are the deploying that to make that as an application? So one is traditional web hosting. You can go with IaaS or Nginx, and you can, however, so IaaS is a kind of a traditional way to deploying the application, right? The same way you can even deploying the Next.js application and even Docker container hosting. I mean, container hosting is also available. You when you create an Next.js application, even you can host it to the Docker containers and cloud platforms, and even you can go with the serverless platforms called Versal and all. You can that is a recommended approach. So in case you are creating the Next.js application, go with the serverless platforms is the kind of a recommended approach, right? So even but rather than that, I just wanted to mention you all other three options are also available when you're creating an Next.js application. The next slide, yeah. The final part is in case I created the Next.js application, so how it can be hosted. So what is my background architecture? Earlier and all, so I have a CM server and CD server. I know CD server is the one who is feeding the content to the website. So I make that as a live website. So whatever the content present in CD server is actually available in the website. That's how we know it. But right now we start creating the JavaScript applications, Next.js application. I have created it. So how do I host it? So which one is the front end server? Which one is providing the live contents to the users? So when user is accessing the website, where he is landed. So those questions will coming into our mind, right? So that it's actually when you created the Next.js application that we used to call that as a rendering host application. It's a kind of a JavaScript runtime application, right? So we have the JSS library utilized and created the Next.js application. So when user is requesting a website, it actually hits the Next.js application, and then it's going to the load balancer, and whatever the Sitecore contents has to be acquired, it actually contact the content delivery service, and we need to make sure the content delivery servers are already enabled with headless service. And content delivery service actually giving the content to Next.js application, and that gets rendered. So for the content delivery service, we all know CM server is the one who is uh, providing the published contents. So it may have a draft version as well, right? So only the published content can be exposed to the website. Because of that, we are taking the content from content delivery. It's a kind of a graphical pictorial representation. It should not work as accurate. I have mentioned here. It's just for understanding purpose. I have mentioned over here. So because we are not actually taking the content from, I mean, presenting the content from content delivery. Instead of that, we are placing the rendering host application that we are going to create. And through that, either it would be SSP or SSR, whatever concept you are implementing it. From there, all the website requests are handled and the content to be displayed. That's how it works in the headless architecture of Sitecore, any Sitecore implementation. And even if you go with the experience edge and all in future, even the content delivery is not required, right? So we all know it. So instead of content delivery part, we can just replacing the experience edge concept, and through that, it actually reducing much cost, efficiency, and all, right? So that we all know it when we are coming to the experience edge and all. So that's all about the headless architecture. And it's about the basic introduction about how headless, what is headless and how it works, and how to create the Next.js application. And it's about the basic information. So what I have provided, I think I believe everyone have some understanding on that. based on my presentation. So next is a kind of a demo we are going to show it. Like it's all about so how we are creating a Next.js application and creating some basic component inside that and deploying that into Sitecore instance and how it get rendered. So it's a very basic, but I think it may be useful for someone who already not getting started with headless or Next.js implementation. The one question from Martin: how to implement personalization in JSS? So I think when we are coming into the Next.js, we have uh, a preview mode and all. So with that, we can even connect to the experience editor, and based on, so if that is doable in Sitecore JSS and Next.js, um, personalization is also possible through the way. I think Vignesh, you're
Yeah,
more
sorry,
interested.
I'm in mute. So in terms of that personalization, right? So basically, the default Sitecore personalization also will work here. We have a query string based personalization and persona based personalization. So both will work because the personalization means the content personalization. The content will be personalized and then given to the front end, means the presentation layer through the layout services. So that's how it works. I have implemented some kind of query string based personalization, which we are using always. So it would work. So in terms of that demo, right? So for who are not working with that Sitecore Headless and then Next.js part. So the first step is we have to install that headless rendering. Rendering headless services on the Sitecore. So basically that will come from the Sitecore dev.sitecore.com. You can just redirect to the dev.sitecore.com. You can just find as rendering. So this is where you have to download it. So based on the Sitecore version, you can just choose this package and then get downloaded. Then after that, you have to do like traditional installation of packages, right? The Sitecore, you just do that. So that's how that headless rendering and or headless service will be installed on the Sitecore application. So when you install the Sitecore headless on the Sitecore, which means you can see, right? You can just see insert a tenant. We have traditional, but when you install the headless services or a headless rendering on the Sitecore, you can just see that headless tenant and then headless tenant folder option. So when you want to create a new site, you have to use this headless tenant, not use this existing tenant. So I have created the VJ company tenant. Using that, you can also see when you click on the tenant, you can see headless site. You can just create a headless site. I'm just creating a sample site for you. When you click on the headless site, it'll run the script and then basic of creating a site. Just giving a demo site. Demo.c local. So simple, not complex thing. You just create, the site will get created. That's how we have to create the site. The site will be created by default, the home, default templates, and then presentations, settings, everything will come up. So then after, basically, before starting that Sitecore headless, we have to install the Node.js. Currently, I'm installing a Node.js 18.16.0, which is a recommended version for Next.js specifically. the latest Node.js version, I'm seeing some couple of issues. So I'm just using this 18.16.0. So then after, what you have to do is we have to install the JSS packages like JSS CLI. So which is basically a JSS command execution for it's like a kind of a, what do you say, for the node installation packages, right? For like Sitecore NuGet packages, this is kind of a Sitecore JSS CLI. So then after, what you have to do is to create a Sitecore application, you have to use this command. So which is npx create Sitecore JSS at the right version. Version is headless version. For example, we have 21 in the sense we have to add 21, and then the type of application, it's an NextJS, right? So we have to create a React. Here we have to give the React. So what kind of a language we are using, we have to give this. Then, so once this is set up, you will get this kind of a solution on this particular folder when you create these applications, right? So you will see after everything is completed, you can just see this kind of an application. I have written a blog in the Medium. If you just go through there, a couple of steps how to create an applications, and then when it runs, how it would show. So you can just refer there. Once you install application is created, you could see source folder, Sitecore folders. This is the basic folder structures which provided by the Sitecore. So then after, what you have to do is we have to set up the site. So there are a couple of steps there. For example, in the settings, you have to navigate to the settings. You could see that app name. So for example, here my app name is Maverick. Maverick in the sense that when you create an application, it would ask the application name. So that application name, which is a basic say the key point for that application. Otherwise, that Sitecore doesn't know what is your application. So when you create an application, you will see then the config files under the Sitecore. You see the config folder. You can see the your application name.config. So there you see the app name, then the path and all. You can see it. So you here, right? Which is when you give the JSS setup, you can see you can give these all. You have to give all these details basically. Then so that app name will by defaultly create. The app name is not big deal. It's like a site name. So in the Next.js, everything is a component, and then basically a whole project we call it as an app. So once that is done, we have to put something like this is the main thing, server-side rendering engines. As Prabhu mentioned, right? We have different types of rendering engines, and Node.js and then HTTP. So Node.js is basically a pretty old thing. Now, basically, is we are using a HTTP rendering engine for all the Next.js applications. And then this is a server-side rendering engine URL. This is specifically for the connected mode. So when you when you're giving a start connecting, right, and that time this local instance should recognize with our Sitecore. So for that reasons, I have put it basic thing. So Sitecore, this JSS application will run Sitecore localhost 3000 port, and then there's deployment secret. This deployment secret I'll come later, but we have to add it here. So once that JS setting up a site, we have to create an API key. API key is a kind of a entry point, or it's kind of thing. Open that. So API key is like to validate our application, right? So with the connecting that layer services, that because presentation layer is separated, right? So and then the content layer is separated. So both need to be connected, right? So to validate that, this is the API key. So we have to come to the system and then settings. Under the services, you can see the API keys folder. These templates will come only if you install the headless rendering services. Otherwise, it won't come. So once you install, you just right click and then create a key. You can just create a API key. So once this is just created, like we can mention like course origins and then allowed controls, like specific site names and all. Here we can mention. Currently, I'm using a local, right? So I put star. Which means I'm allowing all the course origins and then all the controllers allowed to access my this Sitecore content. So once this is done, we have to create the placeholder. Yeah, placeholder, right? So placeholder is a pretty basic thing. We have to create from the placeholder settings. And so as per your tenant, I'm just creating under that. Company and then just creating placeholder. JSS. So once that placeholder is created, pretty basic things like allowed controls and everything is as such as same. But what Prabhu mentioned previously, we have to mention that in the layout services. When you go to that site, you can see the basic layout of the site is our JSS Maverick layout. Basically, app names, based on the app name, it will just create the layout. You can see that Maverick layout is created. So on that layout, if you just navigate it there you can see that layout services placeholder. Here we have to add that particular placeholder which we created. Otherwise, Sitecore does not understand or it won't allow to get the content basically from this layout services. It won't allow because layout services is giving the data to the presentation layer. Everything is in a JSON format. So that won't allow because that doesn't know what is JSS demo. So then after you have to mention this, add this placeholder on the basic of site template. So when you go to that project, you can see app route. This is the basic site template. App route is a basic page template. When you go to the presentation layer, just to edit, then controls the place settings, add, click that, give the key. So once this is done, so we are all set for that placeholders. So next thing is we have to create the component. So component is pretty basic thing is rendering. The front end world, they called it as a component, but Sitecore world, we call it as a renderings. So just we have to create the rendering. We are using a JSON rendering because layout services and everything given as a JSON. So our application will recognize the JSON format. So that's why we are just creating a JSON rendering. Here I'm just creating a demo. So this is the component name. The same exact name we have when we have to create when we create the component on the NextJS application. So I'm just going to create a component in the NextJS application. So for that, we have a basic scaffold command. I'm just giving a demo where we created a demo application, demo component, right? Demo slash. The first one is a folder name. The second one is a component name. So once this command got executed, so before that, I'm just giving an overview of the folder structures. So when we are using a connected mode, you can get the data from data folder, which means all the data are in a YAML format, like traditional YAML format for that, which we are getting the data. So for that, I would recommend to use a storybook, which is emerging now. So for the front end developers who is using a componentization structure, you just use that storybook. So this is the website. You can just go and refer there. In future blogs, I would try to write how to set up the storybooks and all. So once this component is created, right, this command is executed, says scaffold demo is completed. You can see under the components, you can see the demo folder. Under the demo, you can see the demo.tsx. Okay, so once this is done, we have just Sitecore part, placeholder settings, select demo that allow renderings, cloud controls. So we're just adding this. So on the Sitecore part, you can see that to create the placeholder. The placeholder is a basic, it is also a component on the JSS. Given the JSS demo, right? So I'm just giving JSS demo. To start, I'm just using a start connected mode. So npm run start. In the meantime, I'm just creating some data for this. It's taking some time. So while it is running, I'm just giving you a deployment option. So currently for a local instance, local IAS I'm using. For that IAS, I'm using an IAS node. Yeah, IAS node is basically developed from the C++, which run on top of Node. So we can just use that. We have to download that IAS node from web online, and then we have to install it on the IAS. So once that IAS node is installed, we can use that default IAS server for the deployment purpose. So some kind of hosting in our application on the local to gone through some basic pretty once we deployed, right? At that time, you may face some kind of issues like authentication issues, and then so that kind of an issues you cannot find it from the local host. So for that, you have to use that deployment method and then see. And only this will work. I mean, will work in the local host. I mean, you can find some different things. So once this is done, you can see that localhost 3000, you just run it on the browser, you can see this application. I just created existing application and just create. Just create a page. Demo. So in the demo, I'm just experience editor. You can see our placeholder has came here. So I'm adding the layout, so it just came here. So the basic demo I'm adding here, setting up a data source. Just give me a second. Try to add. So yeah, I'm just using the existing data source. So you see, right, the demo component content is displaying. So this is how the basic of pasting a component, and then just using the JSS start connected mode, you can just displaying on that on the page. So this is how the basic of creating a basic component creation and then placeholder settings and everything. So here is the command for taking up a build. So npm run build. So what it does is it will just create the build from the basic of this taking all this source and every folder and then converting it to a JS script, and then it will give you a subfolder. So in that thing, I have created an application in that IIS. So I have already hosted here. When you host here, you have to put that things in here. So once the build is completed, we have to put it here, and then when you navigate to that hosting, you see, right, this is a localhost 3000. I'm just adding in the NextJS.local. This is how my hosting I have added here. Once the build is being created, then it's deployed to IIS node. It will render here. This is how the IIS node and then local deployment will. So from my side, and if you want basic of creating all the setting up a site, right, you can just navigate to Medium site and working the blogs. I have written many more blogs like this development, and then this kind of thing you just go through and there, and then keeping posted. If you have any queries, just post me on LinkedIn or so the medium you. So from my side, thank you.
We see two questions. We are not taking much time on that. I think we can